The lesson outcome for this video is factoring using magic number or AC method, whichever you are used to calling it. And this is again an important review for this chapter. Okay, so first thing we have here is 6x squared minus 13x minus 5. We know we cannot factor this using our quick method, which means just putting the two sets of parentheses down right away, because this a value right here is not a 1. Okay, so we're going to use our other process for doing this, which is the AC method or magic number method. Before we start this one, we want to make sure that we have factored out a GCF if there is one. 6, 13 or negative 13 and negative 5 do not have a common factor, and there is not an x in all three terms. So we do not have a GCF. So we will start right away by multiplying the a term times the c term, which is why we call it the AC method in some cases. So we have 6 times negative 5, which is negative 30. And when I taught this, I said let's include that x squared in there as well. Other teachers might not have, so depending on what you're used to, you could put this x squared in or you don't have to. All right, now what we want to do is the same thing we would do if a did equal 1, is we want to start listing all the factors of negative 30. So we know 1 times 30 is 30, but we know one of them has to be negative to get the negative 30. I'm also going to include the x next to each of these because now when we look at this, we say that negative 1x times positive 30x is negative 30x squared. Now we'll go through and list all of our factors. So we have 2 times 15, but one of them has to be negative, and we'll include the x. 3 times 10 is 30, but one of them has to be negative, and we'll include the x. 5 times 6 is 30, one of them needs to be negative, and we'll include our x. Now that we have all the factor pairs, we look for which factor pair adds up to our middle term of negative 13. We see that right here, this right here adds up to 13x, and again we need negative 13, so this is where we need to switch our signs from a negative 2x to a positive 2x, and from positive 15x to a negative 15x. These will now add up to negative 13x, which is what we need. Okay, so we're going to use positive 2x and negative 15x when we do the next 3 steps. So what we have to remember to do over here is we need to, this is how I taught it anyways, I say take that 6x squared and the negative 5x and kind of separate them a little bit, knowing that we have to change this negative 13x term to two terms that add up to negative 13x, which are these two terms here. So we're going to put those in, so plus 2x and minus 15x. All right, and now we are going to put that vertical line in right here, and we're going to factor the GCF out of each side of that line. So over here, 6x squared and a positive 2x, we have a common factor of 2 and an x. So we're going to factor out a 2 and an x, and we say what's left. There's a 3 and an x left in the first term, and then since we factored all the 2x out here, don't forget we need a plus 1, because 2 divided by 2 is 1. On the right-hand side, we are going to remember a very important thing here. We're going to factor out the negative if this front term is negative. So we're going to factor out a negative, and in this case we can factor out negative 5. And again, we'll say what's left. 15 divided by 5 is 3, so we have 3x left there. Again, this negative is being factored out right here, so we're going to have a plus, and then 5 divided by 5 is 1, so plus 1. Now, remember the trick here is we have to make sure that the parentheses match, and our parentheses do in fact match 3x plus 1. So we're going to factor that out of each term now. See, this is a term minus the other term. So there's a common factor, and we're going to factor that 3x plus 1 out. So we write 3x plus 1, the matching factor, and then we say what is left in each term. So there's a 2x left in this term, and there's a negative 5 left in this term, so we're going to write 2x minus 5. Again, this 2x goes here, and this negative 5 goes here, and we have now factored that quadratic expression. Okay, and let's just do one more example for this lesson. Remember, the first thing we always want to do, always, is always look for a GCF before you begin any factoring problem. If you don't, the problem will be more difficult. We don't want that. So if you look at 6, negative 76, and positive 48, we know that all of these are divisible by 2. Now, you could think for a little while about whether there'd be a larger factor that you could divide each by, but this is not divisible by 6, so we won't be able to factor out a 6. And it is also not divisible by 3. So 2 is the GCF, the greatest common factor. So we're going to factor that out, and we're going to say what's left. So 3x squared, when you factor 2 out of that, minus 38x, which is left after you factor out a 2, plus 24. All right. Now, the way I go through these next couple steps is I always say, let's bring that GCF down a couple of steps and say, we know this is going to be in our final answer with our 2 sets of parentheses next to it, okay? And we're going to have 2 lines of work to get there. All right, so the first step again for that is to find our magic number, and to do that, we're going to multiply the 3 times 24, and that is 72. And I, again, include the x squared with it, so I don't forget my x's when I put them back into the equation. All right, so we have our factors of 72, 1 times 72, and let's put an x with both of those. 2 times 36, 3 times 24, 4 times 18, it's not divisible by 5. It is divisible by 6. 6 times 12. It is not divisible by 7. And it is divisible by 8. 8 times 9. Okay, so now again we look for the factor pair that adds up to our middle term of negative 38. Well, these add up to 73x, these add up to 38x. So we actually found it pretty quick here, 38x, and some of you might have seen that earlier when you were writing the factors down to begin with. You don't have to write out every single factor if you find the correct one right away. But we do need a negative 38 in our center term. Right now we have a positive 38. We need to make both of these terms negative, because a negative times a negative is still a positive 72x squared in this case, and now they add up to negative 38x, which is what we need. So here's our factor pair that we're using. I'm going to again write my 3x squared here and my plus 24 here, and fill in the negative 2x and the negative 36x. Again, these 2 terms right here add up to negative 38x. So we're not changing anything, we're just expanding this term into 2. And now we put our vertical line down after the second term. Factor out the GCF of the left-hand side. In this case, 3 and 2 are not divisible by the same number, so we're just factoring out an x. And when we do that, we're left with a 3x in the first term and a minus 2. On the right-hand side, we can factor out, and again, this negative is going to be factored out, and 36 and 24 are both divisible by 12. Okay, and what's left there is a 3x for our first term, and minus, again, this positive right here, if we factor out a negative, we need a negative right here, minus 2. Again, our parentheses should match. If they do, we're on the right track. We're going to write that here in the first set of parentheses, 3x minus 2. And then whatever's left out here, so that's an x and a minus 12, will go here and here. So we have x minus 12, and we have factored that quadratic expression.